Hi, it's me, Scott Blakely, from Blakely Bassoon Studios and Lil Ass Kicker's Bassoon Reeds. You know, I've been making bassoon reeds for almost 3 decades now, and there's something about the process that's always kind of bothered me. It's Mummies. I still remember the first time I was taught how to make a reed. I was so excited to be taking control over my sound, my articulation, my reeds. And then I saw this, and I was all, ugh. It just seemed so tedious and wasteful. Luckily, I soon discovered that I could certainly make reeds without mummies. But I kept noticing just how many people continue to do it. And I thought to myself, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Well, today I'm going to try to figure that out. I can only think of a couple reasons why people do this. The first, obviously, is to protect and support the cane as we form the tube. Fair enough. I didn't really understand why people were leaving it on for the entire drying process. You see, as cane dries, it shrinks. So it would seem to me that the string around it would loosen and not really be doing anything other than hindering the drying process. But then again, we've all had clothes shrink in the dryer. Well, maybe the string actually gets tighter around the reed. This is, by the way, why some people use rubber bands to make their mummies. But as far as I know, no one's ever tested that theory. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm also going to show you a simpler, faster way that uses reusable materials instead of string or rubber bands. The first thing that I'm going to do is I measured out some butcher's twine. Now, some people use other types of thread, crochet cotton, and I'm not going to test every single type. I imagine there's some difference. So if there's something you use, particularly because of how stretchy or how much it shrinks, let me know. So I'm just measuring my piece here, 26 inches in length. But here's the thing, it's a little stretchy. So if I pull on the string, I can stretch it out to almost 27 inches. Of course, some people wet the string before they wrap it around the reed. And I want to try doing the same thing because that might change the elasticity. It might actually stretch out more. It seems like maybe it's a little bit stretchier when it's wet, but it's pretty much the same. So now I'm going to start by making my mummy. Just wrapping around the first wire, and now I'm trying to keep this pretty taut, pretty tight as I work my way down. The end of the cane here. Should put up a clock to just show how long this is taking me. I'm sure that if I did this normally, I'm sure that if this was part of my normal reed making process, I'd probably be a little bit faster at it. But let's just see how long approximately this whole process takes. Okay. I'm going to tie it. Okay. Those of you that have seen my more ancient videos know that I use steam to form my tube. So, still using steam. I'm actually gonna keep this in the steam a little longer since I imagine the string is kind of getting in the way. But now we're getting it open, and then we just push down. You can see people say don't twist. I will sometimes. I'm finding I kind of need to do a little bit of twisting to get it here. Now the thing is, one of the things already that I'm sort of realizing is that I can't see this first wire. So even though I've given it a little squeeze, I really don't have a good sense of like if I've opened it up a little more than I should. I'm trying not to, but I can't see. So that's a little trickier. Okay. Now we have some steamed mummies. I'm going to let these dry for a couple weeks, and then I'm going to measure that string, see if it's shrunk and also if it's still stretchy or not. We'll also compare how round the tubes are to my method. Now let me show you how I do things. For the longest time, I didn't fuck with mummies, okay? I just used steam to form, which made it so that cane was nice and soft and the tubes were very round, and I would just put another wire at the bottom. But there were a couple problems with this. One, for a while I would put the wire on first, which made it harder to get the reed on the mandrel. I'd end up doing more twisting, more, squeezing with the pliers more. It would crunch the cane a little. It would just take more time. And the other real issue, I say real issue, but honestly, I still think it was relatively minor, is that the wire at the bottom, whether I did it before or after putting the reed on the mandrel, that wire would crimp the very back of the tube a little bit. And that made it so my bevel wasn't quite as effective. And I also found myself having to ream a bit more. So I wanted to come up with something that would, keep tension around the tube while it was the entire time that it was drying, but wasn't going to be so harsh as to sink into the cane. And that's when I thought of hose clamps. What are hose clamps, Scott? Well, this is an 8mm hose clamp. These are all hose clamps too. These are 7mm hose clamps. I'll show you what I use them for in a moment. I've experimented with different kinds. These are there's not as much tension, so I've decided I don't like them as much. I find them a little harder to work with, even though they look like they're a little bit more perfectly round. But the finish on these, or the metal type that they're made with, I haven't found a significant difference. What I have found is that between different ones that I bought, just how perfectly round they are does vary to some degree. But I honestly haven't had problems because the mandrel that the cane is being clamped around is perfectly round. The important thing is that this is going to keep tension around the entire blank. So just give this a little bit of steam for a few seconds. La 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 la. Now I can just push it on. That one kind of went almost all the way into place. I actually, in this case, still want to give the first wire just a little bit more open. Okay. So now I add my hose clamp to the bottom. Boom. Check that out. You tell me, what looks like a better use of your time and resources? The hose clamp or the mummy? Mummy! Ah! Okay, so now it's been about 24 hours, and as the cane has dried, it's shrunk a little bit. And whereas this was on quite snug before, at the very bottom, it's still somewhat snug, but not, I can just pull it right off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this 8mm hose clamp with a 7mm hose clamp. And because it's really quite simple to do this, and hose clamps are pretty cheap, I'm actually going to go ahead and put 2 on. I've done quite a few reeds where I've done just 1 and done just 2, and honestly I can't tell much of a difference. It's just so little effort to put that second hose clamp on. And now those are on there really snug, and they're going to stay snug for the rest of the 2 weeks minus 1 day at minimum drying time that I give my reeds. And this way we don't have to deal with any damn mummies. All right, so it's been actually a little bit over 3 weeks that I've been letting these puppies dry. Most of my normal blanks, and then of course a couple mummies. Let's compare and see how they did. So first thing I'm just curious about is, do these feel snug? So if you make mummies normally, you would already have a sense of this, but I haven't made one in 20 years or so, more than that. Anyways, and so I'm curious, like, is this going to feel very snug? And I wouldn't exactly call it loose, but it's not really tight either. Meaning at some point, it's really not doing anything. It's not doing anything to really reinforce the structure. My hose clamps, on the other hand, are still forcing the cane against the mandrel. Let's measure this now. Let's see if there's any significant shrinkage or stretching. And also one other thing I want to do, because when we talk about circumference, I want to count the times that this is like wrapped around the tube. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 times it was wrapped around the tube. So theoretically, if this was wrapped around 15 times and we had a 0.5 millimeter diameter change in the tube, this should be about, or 23 millimeters, I think I might have said, shorter, okay? We were at 26 inches when we started, and I'm trying not to, put any stretch on it, because remember it was stretching before? It looks like, it might have shrunk a 1/16 of an inch. Might have. All right, so that's just one aspect. Let's look at the other aspect, which is how round are these tubes, okay? First of all, it looks good. I don't really see a bunch of cracking here. It's a little hard to judge these until I bevel them, but that's not what we're here for. Yeah, there's no issues of cracking. Looks pretty round, right? All right, let's compare it to one of these. All right, now these are still tight. I need to use my pliers to get it off. Okay. So there's no cracking. There's no real indentation like what I was getting from the wires. There's kind of almost looks like a scratch, but it's really superficial. Okay, so this was right side hose clamp, left side mummy. They both look pretty round. I don't really see a significant difference. It almost looks like on this one that like right about here that the cane is a little bit more compressed. It almost gives this impression. But if you're looking at the interior diameter, that's perfectly round. And maybe on the exterior, this is a little bit crunched right here. Yeah, it's really hard to say if there is a significant difference. They both look the tubes look pretty round in either case. And this is, obviously this is before we do any reaming, before we do the beveling. And until you bevel, you can't quite force these sides to come together perfectly. As is often the case with any sort of modification we make to our reeds, the difference is going to be incredibly subtle. And rather than concrete results, we might see tendencies of certain types of outcomes. I don't think that the end result, the quality of your reeds, are going to be different whether you form them as mummies or whether you form them Blakely style. In either case, the tube is going to be round, you're not going to have much cracking. The only real difference is going to be the time you save and your exposure to the mummy virus. If I were to even save 30 seconds per reed, and if I'm making a batch of 50 reeds, I just save myself 25 minutes. And to be perfectly honest, 30 seconds I think is really a very conservative estimate. If you're only making 10 blanks at a time, this might very conservatively save you 5 minutes. So say goodbye to the mummies. Bye, Mumleisha. So it looks like Scott Blakely from Blakely Bassoon Studios and Lil Ass Kicker's Bassoon Reeds just saved you some time. No need to thank me. Of course, if you want to, you can do so in the comments. Also, please like and subscribe. But here's the thing. It's a little stretchy. I can stretch it out to almost 27 inches. Bye, Mumleisha.